hopping on this Tuesday afternoon. We are live in the path of Helene. There is our CEO, Derek Klein. Derek is out in Florida right now. And Derek, I'm just going to go ahead and toss this off to you. Tell us about your day. Tell us where you've been, and tell us, what are we looking at right now?
Yeah, so we're right in the path of Hurricane Helene, actually. So this is the area where Helene crossed at its strongest point on I-10, and you can see some severe damage here to this days in. And there's wild damage all over here. The trees are deforested. There's branches down everywhere. Trees uprooted. Trees snapped in half. Everything is is under review here. And so it's definitely a very extreme situation. But we're on our way now to Hurricane Milton. That's going to be making landfall down on the coast and down near Tampa. And so today we flew out this morning here, and so right there we saw, so we took on, not a lot of traffic in the airport there, and we had landed in Tallahassee. Um, and in Tallahassee, it was again not crazy busy, um, but there. I talked to a lady that was on the plane that was headed back to Perry, who was hit with Helene. There were a lot of Red Cross people in the airport, so Red Cross coming in to help folks here in the Florida Panhandle from Helene. And really, that stretches all the way up through Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina. Helene, just a wide impact of widespread damage. But it's I think as we get a little closer to Tampa, as we get to the I-75 corridor and start driving south, we're going to see a whole different magnitude of that feeling, of that eerie feeling, if you will, of Helene or excuse me, Milton, causing the evacuations. And so expecting to see a completely different story, completely different outcome once we head a little bit further south and get out of the path of Helene, which thankfully they're two different paths, right? So the folks here can continue the recovery process, but unfortunately it's going to be a new recovery process for the folks in Tampa, it looks like.
Yeah, obviously, with those people, you said in the airport that you saw some leaving from cleaning up the damage of Helene, and then some coming in prepared to stage for Milton. I know you also said there were some electrical trucks in that area as well to stage for that damage, to stage for um, bringing back the power after Milton comes through. So we've got obviously a lot of people on the roads there, as well as the evacuations.
Yeah, for sure. So you can see the RV park over here behind me. That's not really an RV park. That's just all the restoration folks that have come in, right? All the linemen that are here to help, and really probably still facilitating from Helene. Like they haven't finished recovering from Helene yet, and we've already got another major hurricane making landfall in the state. So state resources are definitely going to be limited when it comes to. And if you haven't been to Florida before, this is not what Florida looks like. It looks more like this over here, where you see all these really tall pine trees. So they're stretched all up and down the highway. So when these hurricanes come in, they snap those pine trees in half, and then they lay across the highway. And so the first thing they have to do is come in and clean that mess up, get the trees cleaned off the interstates, so that way we have the ability to get people in to start helping, whether it's medically, or with power, or with gas, and fuel, and food, just all the resources that'll be needed, because there will be people without power, food, and water in some areas for weeks. After this, after Helene, they're dealing with that now, but then you're gonna add a city of 3.5 million people to that tally when Milton makes landfall tomorrow night.
Derek, I want to go back to whenever you said you were in the airport earlier, or even the grocery store. Was that people's conversation? Whenever people were talking to you at the checkout counter, whenever you were listening to, maybe did you overhear any conversations of them talking about this hurricane? Is that what you're hearing in these places in Florida?
You're hearing about it, and the crazy thing is Milton, because it's such a historic hurricane, you're hearing about Milton everywhere, honestly. So I'm setting on my flight and all the people in all the rows, not talking to me about, that I'm a meteorologist and I understand this, right? They're just with the person in the seat next to them talking about Milton. This is a big story. Becoming I think the fifth lowest hurricane pressure in Atlantic Basin history yesterday, which I personally think it got lower than what we measured. That was just the time that we had a flight in there, but we had a 5-hour gap without a flight. I think it probably got stronger. It was actually on its weakening trend whenever they got that measurement. But now it's intensifying again, and it's going to make headlines, I think, again when they announce that it's a Cat 5 in the next update again. As the hurricane hunter goes in to investigate it, he's going to find winds again. If you just look at the structure of this hurricane, it's back to a Cat 5 again, and now it's we're getting close to being within 24 hours of making.
Oh, and we may have lost Derek's stream here. Oh,
I'm back.
Derek, I think we have your stream back. So go ahead. Go ahead.
Awesome. So, as it makes its landfall and its approach here, it doesn't have much time to weaken. I think we're kind of getting to the point now where it is what it is. We're going to have an extreme and major hurricane making landfall, and we're going to have to deal with the ramifications of that, and they're not going to be fun to deal with.
No, not at all, especially whenever resources are stretched so thin already, over state lines. We saw Georgia, South Carolina, and of course, Florida get hit with this last hurricane, and then now another one come in, hitting a different spot. So we're showing those resources thinner and thinner as this hurricane makes landfall. And of course, this one, an even stronger hurricane we're expecting than the last one was.
Yeah, absolutely. This one could be just catastrophic, especially if it makes a landfall north of Tampa Bay. South of Tampa Bay will be bad, but north of Tampa Bay will be worse.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, turn that camera back around one more time so that we can see the damage for everyone who's hopping on here. We could see the tarp on the roof and everything earlier. Now we're seeing the days in sign. Oh, there we go. Okay. So we can see that there are fence parts displaced here. There's the tarp. And what
So
else can we see from this, Derek, that I can't see on my side?
yeah, so it just removed the roof and the inside off here, right? So we had a south wind here, and it just removed the roof off the building. And kind of here, I'll stretch over here at the top. You can see some of the debris on the fence line there. That's the whole chunk of roof there. In that parking lot right there, there's a light pole that's bent in half all the way down to the ground, just showing the power of what the wind was. It's really difficult, I'm sure, to see from here, but you can see the trees just laid over. And you can see the one standing, but about half of them are actually laid over. And then if we come back over this way, just across the ground, just to kind of show, like you can see all the white. That's the insulation from the roof of this Days Inn. And then just littered everywhere, we've got pieces of sheet metal. We've got pieces of board from the roof. The shingles, this is a metal roof, so I don't know where this came from. This came from some other property or structure, but it's all the way, and this isn't the only shingle, right? They're like littered with shingles here, all in the parking lot. So, I don't see a green shingle roof anywhere around here, so I'm not sure where that actually came from. So, that's just how strong the wind. I mean, winds here were probably pushing 120 to 130 miles per hour for a 1 to 2 hour stretch.
Wow. And now we're 2 weeks later. Obviously, we still see all of this damage. And something that occurred to me while you were showing us the roof of what looks like a hotel or maybe a motel behind you is that this could be a place where people are sheltering from Milton, but it can no longer be a place that people can shelter because it's damaged from the most previous hurricane. So now people have to go even farther to get that shelter.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, this is a motel, so it could be used to host people that are here for recovery. There's lots of things. This is a diner over here with its roof off, so you think about, well, this is a place to go eat. Well, I mean, I don't know that you can eat there now, right? If the roof is removed, I'm assuming they can't serve food. Um, so, what does that mean for everybody around here now? The McDonald's is still going, so that's that's a plus over there. But and there's a Comfort Inn, it looks like, down the street that's still there. It's got some roof damage, but it looks like they're able to stay in that. So, I think here business is closer to normal, but it's not normal yet. And they definitely still have several months of work. And you'll see, if you drive down I-10, you'll see the damage from this hurricane next year. It'll still be evident where this hurricane crossed.
Absolutely. We know that from tornado damage here in Oklahoma, we know that that damage doesn't go away within a few weeks. But those resources are stretched so thin, as you just mentioned, maybe a place that people could have stayed to get shelter from this incoming hurricane, or maybe to seek shelter after this hurricane creates all of that destruction. Now they can't use that place. They've got to go even farther to gather those resources. So that's going to be a challenge over the next few days, over the next
Yeah.
few weeks, if not months.
Yeah, and you think about a state with limited resources that has had a lot of hurricanes the last few years, and we're getting ready to add one to probably the second most populated city in the Gulf Coast is going to take potentially its first direct hit in over 100 years. So, resources are going to be tough. I honestly, you kind of don't know how they're going to answer the call. But I know, but
Oh, and we may have lost Derek's stream there. Okay, he may pop back on in just a minute. But while we are waiting for him to hop back on here, I will show you just a quick hurricane update here. So let me grab the screen, make it full screen here. So I think we've got an update actually in about 10 minutes here from the National Hurricane Center here. They're saying damaging hurricane force winds and life-threatening storm surge with destructive waves are expected across the Yucatan Peninsula today. So that is this area on the far bottom side of your screen here. And then obviously you can see this hurricane, a major hurricane. We can make this a little bit bigger here. There you go. A major hurricane, category 4 right now, potentially category 5 in the next update, which I think comes in about 9 minutes here, and then a major hurricane as it makes landfall. Okay, Derek, I see you popping back on here, so we are going to share your screen once again. I think we lost connection earlier, but I can see you now.
yeah, definitely, obviously, still some cell issues around here as well. But I think the big deal is Florida is going to take a big impact. It's hard to fathom how people will be able to recover, but my is we're Americans. We figure out a way to do it. We're strong. Um, we never cease to amaze when it comes to stepping up after a natural disaster. So this is going to be a big one, and it's going to take everybody. But I don't have any doubt that we'll find a way.
Absolutely. And those are such encouraging words for all of those that are either in the path of the hurricane, or their home is in the path of the hurricane, or their business, or maybe even their loved ones are down there as well. Well, I know that you have to hop back on the road here because you are making it to Tampa today. So we're going to let you go. But I appreciate you joining us today, and safe travels. We'll be keeping an eye on Hail Trace social media to see all of your updates over the next few days.
Awesome. Thanks, Taylor.
Yeah, thank you. All righty. I'm going to go ahead and pop you off here, Derek, and I may have John join us in just a minute. Let's see if we can get John on here. As always, if you guys have any questions in the chat, stick them in the chat, stick them in the comments section. We will be on here for the next few minutes. If John can't come on here, I'll give a quick hurricane update here. Just bear with us as we do this live coverage here. So, as we go through the next few minutes, kind of waiting for the next hurricane update, um, okay, we're going to have John jump on here. He's a trooper because I'm kind of springing this on him. But if you know anything about hail traces, we can pivot in just a moment's notice. All righty. So as we're waiting, I think this next hurricane update does come out at 4 o'clock. As we're waiting, I'm going to go ahead and kind of walk us through what we've seen over the last 4 hours, I think is since 5 hours since the most previous hurricane update. One thing that I saw this morning from the National Hurricane Center is some really, really intense messaging here. So something that they posted this morning, and I'm wondering if it's still on here, is that they said this could be the most devastating hurricane in the history of Florida. I mean, just absolutely impressive here that they're using that type of wording. And I see John is also on here. John, I was just talking about some of the messaging that the National
Mhm.
Hurricane Center has used over the last 24 hours, saying that this could be the most devastating or damaging um, hurricane in the history of West Central Florida. They are definitely taking this seriously, as they have been over the last few days, but you can
Yeah.
tell how serious they're taking it by their messaging.
Yeah, they've really been so I'm just throwing in here, the update just came in when I popped up. I have it on here, I have it on GR. If you have GR Earth open, they have updated back to a category 5 as expected. So that makes sense why this messaging is going to be so strong. The fact that we had the hurricane weaken a little bit as it went through an eyewall replacement cycle last night, and it really ramped up again. I think the biggest thing I'm
Do you want to
curious
share your
if
screen
yeah,
and you can kind
I
of
mean,
walk us through this here?
yeah, let's see. How do I do that part? I didn't do that. Derek did that
So there's
yesterday.
like
So,
So there's like a screen with an arrow button at the very bottom of
mhm.
your of the restream screen here,
Oh yeah,
and
there
then
it
I
is. Right
should be
there.
able to
Found it.
pop up your screen
Okay.
after that.
Okay. So here we go. I should have it there.
Perfect.
There we go. Okay.
There you go.
So, GR updates a little bit faster than the National Hurricane Center does because obviously they have to get all the graphics together and stuff. But on here, you pretty much just need to get the cone and everything. So it is now a category 5 yet again, 145 knots. That's was that 160? I want to say something like that. I'm not knots to miles per hour isn't,
I can't do that in my head.
but it should be around that the 160, maybe 165. The
165. There you go. That's what the
165.
National Hurricane
Yes,
Center
yeah,
has. Yep.
yeah. It's 165. So they just updated the graphic, but so they have it right here where you can see the eye and you can see all that lightning coming around here. This is if you guys watched Derek and I talk yesterday, pretty much the same time. It was basically the same thing. It is a little bit bigger. It was a nice little pinhole before. So yesterday the eye was about 3.5 miles wide, which is about a mile wider than the El Reno tornado was, just to give some perspective. Um,
Wow.
it was really tight yesterday, and now it is a little more
Yeah.
classic. You have that clear eye. If you were sitting here in the middle of the storm, you'd have sunny skies and calm-ish winds, and it looks like it is forecast to stay a 5 through about midnight tonight. Drop to a 4, a high end 4, 130 knots. So that's gonna be about 150 miles an hour, and that's midday tomorrow. So 18Z. That's 1 p.m. Central Time, and it looks like they have shifted the track further south, which a lot of the forecast models have done over the course of the last hour or two. And because the reason for that was because Milton got so powerful, it managed to kind of deviate a little bit to the south. And what that did is that little tick to the south, that little wobble, is now making it more likely that it stays a little further south. Uh, which again, this is a game of inches, right? With the Tampa area specifically. If you have the center of the hurricane hit St. Petersburg, that is probably the worst case scenario for Tampa Bay. You're going to have a strong onshore wind feeding the water into the bay and flooding out Tampa really bad. Now, the track that it is showing at the moment here, and it could wobble back and forth again. This is not finalized by any means, but the track that's showing now would have, unfortunately, a catastrophic surge for everywhere from about Cape Coral up through about Sarasota, Florida, where that direct hit would be in Sarasota as a powerful Category 3 hurricane uh, after midnight, probably about 1, 2 o'clock in the morning Central Time, or probably 2, 3 in the morning Eastern Time on Thursday morning, which I will not be awake for. So that'll be a long, long night, but that is what it's looking like right now. And the big thing to remember is here is Thursday at 1 p.m. Central Time or 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and it is still a Category 1 hurricane coming off the Space Coast over by Cocoa Beach. So it will go across the entirety of the peninsula here as a hurricane. So that includes places like Orlando and everywhere on the East Coast, like Daytona Beach, the Space Coast, all of that. So this is going to be a
And
pretty widespread event here.
and I really want to drive that point home to people, is that this is a hurricane all the way across the peninsula. That's what you said, John, that you
Yeah,
can't say, "Oh, I'm inland. I'm inland. It's not going to impact me because I'm in the middle of the peninsula." That's still a hurricane in the middle
yeah,
of the peninsula. I mean, I think that's really important for people to know. If you have friends out in Florida that are saying, "No, I'm inland in Florida," you still get a cat two. You still get a cat one hurricane, even while that thing is on land. That is still a hurricane. I mean, that is still hurricane force winds, rather. I mean, that's really, really impressive. I don't know
yeah.
how often that happens, but it sounds pretty rare for that to happen.
Yeah, the last time I remember, Ian in 2022 had a similar setup where it came ashore by Port Charlotte down here in the Punta Gorda area, and it crossed and popped out on the East Coast by Daytona Beach. I believe it was a strong tropical storm, had more land to cross. But the big thing was it had strong impacts across a lot of Florida. And then there was storm surge in Daytona Beach because once the hurricane crosses and you now suddenly have this northerly breeze, everything spins counterclockwise. Well, now that north uh, western wind gust is blowing off the water again. So it's very possible uh, Thursday afternoon as Milton exits the area here and pops out the east coast of Florida, wherever that ends up being, the northern sections of where the hurricane impact will also see storm surge. Daytona Beach, again, if Ian had storm surge, pretty bad storm surge in Daytona Beach. We could see that happen again here as Milton ends up crossing uh, and just has wind blowing. That's part of Florida, unfortunately. You have a lot of beautiful coastline, which unfortunately means when a hurricane does this, you're going to kind of see it from all sides. So, yeah, overall,
And
that latest update, at least from here, I mean, we can obviously go to the National Hurricane Center and see what their messaging is, but it looks like tracks a little further south, just a just a hair. Again, that 30, 40 miles can make a huge difference for Tampa. Tampa will likely still see. I mean, again, if we were taking this as gospel, Tampa would still see hurricane force winds. You would still see storm surge. You would still see uh, tons of flooding rain. But it wouldn't be the utter catastrophe than if it were to then shift another 40 miles to the north again. So this is why this whole area is under hurricane warning and why everything is
mhm.
so being hammered home is bad because somebody here from about Cape Coral north to around the Tampa Bay area is going to see some catastrophic storm surge and a really intense hurricane. And we're not going to know that where exactly that's going to make landfall probably till 5, 6 hours beforehand. And that will be tomorrow evening when conditions are way too bad for people to leave. So hopefully, folks who are evacuating have evacuated today.
Absolutely. Well, and we were talking to Derek earlier. He said that there weren't a ton of people on the roads outside of Tallahassee, but he did expect that to change as he was heading closer to Tampa. But speaking of talking to Derek earlier, he was showing us just how much damage there was, or how many trees were blown over, how many roofs were pulled off of hotels or motels or even uh, diners, places that people would otherwise go shelter in, would otherwise go find food in, and how those, as people are evacuating that area that's expecting Milton right now, that's hit by Helene. People evacuate to the north
Mhm.
into these areas, and they have to go even farther to find a hotel or a motel that's open, to find a shelter, to find food. So resources are definitely stretched thin here. And as that storm surge on the east side of Florida starts to ramp
Mhm.
up on Thursday morning, I'm kind of wondering what that's going to do for those homes that were already hit,
Yeah.
and those businesses that were already hit by Helene just 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things we talked about yesterday as well, is there were so many areas that got hit with the storm surge, and there's so much debris everywhere already along the coastline where this is going to make direct landfall. And it's
Ugh.
just, you know, it's already dangerous enough when a hurricane hits and obviously debris gets flying. But when there's just open debris that you don't need a lot of force to really get going, uh, yeah,
Mhm.
it's going to be a mess. And it seems like people are heeding the warning. I think when they see Category 5, they pay attention a little bit more. I mean, I have a fair number of friends in the area who either directly or through somebody else reached out to be like, "Hey, is this a good idea? This is where I'm at." And it's like I just say, if you're in a mandatory evacuation zone, there's a reason why they're really urging you to leave. Like,
Absolutely. We do have a few questions here. Oh, do you want
okay.
to start with the category 5 and then we can kind of go through some of our questions here?
Oh yeah, I was just looking. So the hurricane hunters are literally right now going through the eye of the storm. So I was looking to see what the latest. So they put little drops on, so basically little weather devices that they drop into the hurricane and get data. And I was just trying to see what wind speeds they were pulling. Their maximum wind speed that they do say is questionable was 177 knots, which is very high. I don't think it's actually that. It's most likely lower than that, but probably closer to, because the previous one was at 138 knots. So probably in the
Okay.
140s somewhere, which would be around 165 miles an hour, is what they're.
And
I'm.
that's what
I'm
the National Hurricane Center had, is
yeah.
165.
Yeah, so I'm expecting this to continue to update. They'll likely cut through the center here and then go out the other side of the eye wall and then see just how strong those winds are and how low that pressure is. So really get an idea of what level of category 5 it is. Yeah, again, yesterday we were at record levels for October in the Gulf. I don't think it's as strong as that from yesterday evening, but we'll just kind of see where it goes. But
And I was about to go, I mean, right in that same direction, talking
mhm,
about the record that we broke yesterday for low pressure. We also saw high wind speeds. I think 180 is what we saw
yeah,
yesterday. Obviously, a Cat 5 is a Cat 5, but this is weaker than what we saw for that Cat 5 yesterday. And
yeah,
I
and
and that word weaker, it's still an extreme storm,
yeah,
but it's on the lower end of what we saw
yeah, yeah.
yesterday. I don't know the right terminology there.
Yeah,
All of
it's
these seem like you can't justify just how strong the storm is.
yeah, it's a good way to put it is like for folks who remember Katrina specifically. Katrina prior to landfall reached a potent category 5. And then upon approach, it began to weaken and made landfall only as a category 3. A lot of people think that Katrina was a cat 5 because it was so devastating. And you just say Katrina, and Americans know what that means.
Mhm.
And it just shows that it doesn't necessarily mean that the what the category is at the moment of landfall is the most important factor. You had Katrina had a long time, it was a very big hurricane, a long time to pull up all of that all-time record storm surge and push it into coastal Mississippi that completely wiped out towns and then overloaded the levee system in New Orleans. This feels kind of like that. You have a very potent hurricane out in the Gulf, able to get a huge fetch of water, so basically get all that water and start pushing it towards the coast. So even if it begins to weaken upon approach and it only makes landfall as a Cat 3, it's very likely to still be very surprising for a lot of folks for how damaging it's likely going to be.
And we always talk about this, but those categories are only part of a way to to categorize give information, give details about the hurricane. The categories are based on wind speed. That doesn't take into account the storm surge, how many people are impacted, the flooding impacts that are going to happen, the tornadoes. I mean, there's so many other things that goes into the impacts and the devastation of a hurricane. The category rating is just one of those. But still, a Cat 3, that's a major hurricane.
Yeah. There's a reason why a major, it's a big deal. So we can go where you're heading. I know you probably have what the National Hurricane Center did bring up, and any questions they have.
Yeah, I was going to get to a few of these questions, but let's also get to the National Hurricane Center after that. So one of our questions is, with the new update, what do you think the winds are going to be in Orlando? So I think that's a great question, because Orlando is one of those cities that we said, don't say, no, I'm inland. You also are going to get those hurricane force winds, even whenever you're inland. Is Orlando in that path of hurricane force winds?
Yes, I'd say it's pretty likely. Uh, Orlando could see some pretty strong gusts. I category one level hurricane, category one hurricane force wind gusts. I could very likely see impact Orlando. Depending on where you are in the metro, may make a difference. Depending on where it makes landfall. If it does make landfall in Sarasota and pop out by Palm Bay, uh, places further south like Kissimmee and the southern portions of the Orlando metro may have a higher chance of seeing wind gusts in that 75 to 85 range, and then maybe the northern suburbs of the Orlando area seeing a little bit less. But that is all the really small scale stuff that we won't really know until we see landfall. I'd say if you're in the Orlando area, expect impacts similar to what you may have seen in Ian, what you may have seen in Irma, uh, what you may have seen. I'm trying to think of another hurricane that like kind of cut across the peninsula. Those two I can think off the top of my head. So similar to like Irma and Ian, where you had that category one level wind gusts where the power grid's probably going to struggle a bit, probably quite a bit. A lot of trees down, maybe some other damage from that. Definitely more impactful than say Helene, which I don't think Orlando saw a whole hell of a lot from Helene. I mean, I saw reels and TikToks or whatever, people going to trying to still have their Disney World vacation, and Helene was coming by. So not that weak. I think it'll likely be pretty strong. So these, like for example,
one of those
the
that
red.
We say, yeah, don't go to Disney World during this. I feel like that's a given, but yeah, stay inside or follow the local evacuation or preparation orders.
Yeah. So these red circles here on this map, that's going to be where your hurricane force winds are. So in this prediction, you're going to have Orlando within that hurricane force wind. The pink, that's your more intense one, probably major hurricane wind gusts or something along the lines of that. So very likely you're going to get strong gusts. Helene tearing out much of Georgia taught me inland can be somewhat irrelevant. Yes, and that just shows hurricanes are a multifaceted beast. I mean, that's why like I've felt for a while now that maybe we need to reanalyze the category system and factor in things like storm surge and flooding potential and everything like that. Yes, it gets significantly more complicated because you have other factors like how do you properly convey the level of severity that happened in Western North Carolina and parts of Georgia and stuff, where even, I mean, NWS Asheville, I think, did a great job to alert people about the flooding potential. But it's one of those things that's very hard to get the message across to people who, you're in 300 miles from the coast in the mountains, like, hurricane, what are you talking about? So that is definitely one of the things that can be difficult, and why, yeah, inland, I'm very glad the way the new cone, the experimental cone National Hurricane Center has shows the hurricane warnings going all the way inland, not just along the coast, because yeah, you're going to see hurricane conditions in Orlando. If you're in Orlando, I would be getting ready to lose power for at least a couple days.
Well, and that's exactly, so I'm going to go ahead and transition right here into what the National Hurricane Center is seeing here, because they do mention that on here. In 1 second, I can kind of scroll through here and get you a better look at this screen. All righty. Okay, so this is the new update from the National Hurricane Center. So what we're seeing here is they talked about Milton wobbling a little bit. They also talk about that this is now a Category 5 hurricane. They also talk about this, and maybe John, you can give some insight to this, but this storm getting bigger. You know, we talk about the strength of it, but also that could go into that category rating if they ever, you know, decide to reassess how they rate hurricanes. How big is this hurricane? Because that's going to impact how many people are hit by a hurricane, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing they talk about in this new update. But I want to get down to some of the key messages here. Here's what they talk about in this second key message. Devastating hurricane force winds are expected along portions of the west coast of Florida where a hurricane warning is in effect. Okay, pretty standard. Milton is forecasted to remain a hurricane as it crosses the Florida Peninsula, and life-threatening hurricane force winds, especially gusts, are expected to spread inland across the peninsula. We talked about that. Here's where I'm going with this here. Preparations to protect life, property, including being ready for long duration power outages should be complete by tonight. Okay, so people still have a little bit of time before all of their preparations or evacuations are complete. However, they're saying tonight it needs to be complete because the power outages, I think, is going to be a really big thing here. You already have all of those crews overextended up in North Florida, up in the Great Bend area to solve all of the power outages from Helene. Now we're going to try to stretch our resources even further down to the south from Milton. This could extend how long our power outages last.
Yeah, and I mean, I we were talking about that today. There's only so many linemen, just physically only so many linemen available across the United States, and they're going to put a lot of priority. They're putting a lot of priority on Western North Carolina. You need to get infrastructure back in place to help begin the recovery process, and the fact that we now have within 2 weeks another major hurricane bearing down an area of significantly higher population density as well. Uh, the wind field, so as Milton gets physically larger, the wind field is expanding. So every time that little eye wall replacement happens, it gets a little wider. So as it expands, you have that bigger area that's going to have hurricane force winds and then the major hurricane force of over 100 miles an hour. Uh, and just looking at right now, right? So we got more of the drop zones to show up while you were reviewing. It's down to 902 millibars again. So
Okay,
that
so we've
is
seen that
where,
pressure go down as well.
yeah, the pressure go down and it passed through the eastern eye wall and it brought in a 153 knot wind gust where it did not question the wind speed. That's 175 miles an hour. So that's even stronger than what they were. So, and
Yeah,
I
I
believe
mean,
that's within,
it's so close to what we saw yesterday. We saw
yeah,
180 yesterday. Now we're at 175 as opposed to
yeah,
earlier. I think we were talking about 165.
165, which the recon plane didn't make it there yet. That was a radar estimate, I think satellite estimate, however they the National Hurricane Center estimates what the likely wind speed, maximum wind speed is based off of available information. But we're putting drop zones in here. They're going to be flying this for a while. I think we're going to see our secondary peak of Milton here over the next 3 to 5 hours. So, and it's just how high does it go? The stronger it gets, the less intense the shear will start to tear it apart. So, that's also a big thing. You know, you have more intense hurricane, the less intense or the less intense of a drop off you're going to have as you get closer to the coast. So, you know, category 3, I'd say is very likely here at landfall. I think what the National Hurricane Center has right now for its track, I'd say is fair. Uh, but it's very possible that the intensity will be a little higher. And honestly, just the wind is just going to add insult to injury. And the larger the hurricane gets, the more powerful that wind is, the more intense that storm surge potential is going to be.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. The more just area that hurricane is going to push water onto the land, and that's going to be bad. Actually, speaking of storm surge, let's go ahead and, oh, did I lose my screen here? Is it back? Okay, there we go.
Yeah,
Let's go ahead and take a look at the storm surge and some other products from the National Hurricane Center. So we've been talking about Milton. If anyone has any questions, stick that in the chat while we talk about storm surge here. So here's your storm surge, 10 to 15 feet in the Tampa Bay area. Okay, 15 feet, that's about 3 times the size of your average human. You're getting up to the second story of your house at this point. So this is some really intense storm surge. Farther up to the north, that storm surge goes down 2 to 4 feet up in Yankeetown. As we head farther down to the south, farther down south of Tampa here, about 8 to 12 feet. We've got 5 to 8 feet. And as we get on the southern tip of Florida, 1 to 3 feet. But this goes, I mean, even as far south as Miami. And if you look over to the east, here's something new that the National Hurricane Center has put since their last update. They've actually extended this a little bit farther to the south as well. So 1 to 3 feet storm surge expected, just a little bit farther south than what they had. I'm sorry.
Pretty much down to Palm Beach now, yeah.
Yeah, which is they had it a little bit farther north earlier today, and now they've extended that farther to the south. So just some small but impactful differences even within the last few hours.
Yeah. And folks from Florida, I mean, this isn't anything new. Hurricane impacts, I mean, I remember Ian, Irma, Matthew, whatever name you want to put out there. The way Florida is just shaped and situated within the Gulf and the Atlantic, you're going to have the natural wobbles of what a hurricane can do makes a world of difference. That 30 miles if it was going directly in Louisiana, 30 miles may not make a big deal because it's like, okay, it's 30 miles closer to New Orleans but for 30 miles, it's actually a fair bit further up the coast, or a fair bit further down the coast, and there's so much population density on both sides of the coast of Florida that 10 to 15 feet, I'd say you continue to bang that drum for Tampa Bay till the end, because you're still going to get pretty intense storm surge either way. Again, the record was set with Helene 2 weeks ago at 8 feet.
8 feet for Tampa?
For the Tampa Bay area.
For Tampa. And now we're expecting
all that,
10 to 15 feet.
Yeah.
Wow. So we're expecting already, we're preparing for records to be broken here.
Yes.
Wow.
I mean, we have not had a direct hit in the Tampa Bay area like this as a major hurricane since the early 1920s. So, and reasons why it hasn't, it's luck, pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, people can have their beliefs of like, oh, well, we're protected by this or whatever. I saw some meme about like it being an Indian burial ground or something silly, but it's at the end of the day, they just have been lucky. But they're very vulnerable to storm surge, especially from a storm coming head on for them. And even if this story ends up hitting Sarasota directly and the surge isn't as bad in Tampa Bay, it's still going to be terrible to the south, wherever that onshore flow is going to be. So the wind blowing from the ocean onto land, that is going to be terrible. And again, Fort Myers, that whole area got rocked just a couple years ago.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah, I remember that hurricane. So we did have one question in here, or one question that we can answer here. We've got a few other people commenting, and we appreciate you watching. We appreciate you commenting as well. Comment your other questions, and we can see if we can answer them. Here's one question. We live in Orlando, and they are putting us in a high risk of flash flooding. Should we leave Florida or should we stay where we are? So we don't answer those questions if you should evacuate, but we can tell you about the flooding risk in your area. If you are interested in those answers to evacuate, I would check with your local government or local emergency management. You can find that in your local news station. But let's talk about those rainfall totals here, because that is a great question. So here's your rainfall totals. We've talked about the storm surge, tons of water into the area. Now you get the rain on top of that. We're talking 12 inches in some places. That is for the Tampa Bay area, and that also includes Orlando. So we had someone talking about Orlando earlier, not only for the wind, but now also for that water. So oftentimes we say, run from the water, hide from the wind. Okay, so
Yeah.
wind is what we get to measure a category of storm, category 1, 2, 3. That's all determined on wind speed, but you also have that rain on top of that. You also have that storm surge. So here we go. There is your rainfall totals, and here is your potential flash flooding. Now, it's really rare to see that pink, to see that high
Yeah.
risk, and we have it in Tampa and Orlando. So that was a great question from
Yeah.
Eli here. And is my
Yeah.
showing up? Is that all showing
Yeah.
up here?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's showing up there. So I mean, I would say, yeah, a high chance of flash flooding. I think it's almost guaranteed. You're gonna see. You've had a lot of, if you're living in the Florida Peninsula. Yeah, if you're watching from Orlando, it's rained a lot the last couple days, so it's not helping the situation. But if you're in areas that if you're in and around the Orlando area that are prone to flash flooding, they will for sure flood. Uh, I can say that with a lot of confidence. In terms of again evacuation, I refer to what you said, Taylor. I'm not the best resource to ask. Should you evacuate if it's not mandatory? Because I want to go into hurricanes. I've experienced hurricanes. I have plenty of experience with the intensity of a hurricane. But I told a bunch of my friends, the average person probably has one hurricane in them. They go through it once and they go, that was horrible. That was scary. The aftermath was awful. I don't want to do it again. So,
Mhm.
and that's just from person to person. But uh, I'd say, you're inland. If you've had flooding in the past, I mean, I would definitely be wary of that. But I'm not going
Absolutely.
to give
Well,
any recommendations beyond that. So,
and you're a meteorologist, like you
yeah,
know the science of all of
yeah,
this, you know where to go to stay safe. Yeah, I would say the average person, just doesn't. They've got experience in other things. You've got experience in the weather, and they may not be as interested in the weather as we
yeah,
are, right?
yeah,
Maybe they
yeah,
don't want to see the flooding and everything. And of course, we don't want to see anything flood, but we, of course, love to watch the weather after we look at it all day on these models. I do want to give it back over to you, John. Is there anything else that you want to walk us through from the National Hurricane Center or anything
um,
from the hurricane hunters before we hop off of here?
well, looking at the hurricane hunters, they've pretty much finished their first pass, so it's going to be a little bit before they go through it again. I think again, I'm pretty sure uh, Milton is going through a second peak right now. Gotta love it. They have a second like epic era, I guess. I mean, at least the upside, the most intense part of the hurricane, the most intense winds, are going to occur mostly over open ocean. If you have a silver lining, we're not going to see 180-mile-an-hour winds in Florida, but it will just unfortunately continue to make the situation a little more dire. Otherwise, I think we've covered a lot here. And if any questions you guys have, we'll try to answer them the best that we can. Again, I just continue to beat the drum. If you've been under a mandatory evacuation zone, heed those warnings. There is a reason for that. I know some people don't have the means to do it, and I get it. Um, but definitely, if you can really consider it, I know getting hotels can be miserable right now, especially the further north you're getting, because you're running into areas that may have harder hit zones that have less resources. But otherwise, just try to stay safe. I say just be smart, you know, and
Absolutely.
stay aware. And if you are hunkering down, you're riding this thing out. If you're in the Tampa area or wherever, you're not in the storm surge zone. You need to be ready to have no power for probably multiple weeks. It's going to take a minute for resources to come back online. So get used to eating a lot of
Yeah.
canned beans, I guess.
This is definitely something that we're not going to stop talking about for a long time. We're going to see the impacts of this for a very long time. So that was
Yeah.
great encouragement, John. I appreciate you jumping on here and sharing some of your expertise. For everyone else who maybe missed the very beginning of the live, we did talk to Derek, who is down in Florida. So if you want to see that after we hop off of here, you can go back and watch this live and you can see all of the damage, all of the trees down and everything, and the roofs ripped off of motels and the roofs ripped off of diners down there that he was showing us earlier. So we appreciate Derek being out there in Florida. And John, I appreciate you sharing your
Hmm.
expertise with us as well. We will, of course, be giving you more updates as we get them on our social media channels. So make sure that you are hitting